back. This week, we're going to be talking about class and social economic status. Last week, we spoke about race, and what you'll be noticing is that each time we begin to deconstruct these concepts, I'm going to be bringing them back to some of the core foundations that we've been learning over the semester. All right, so as to tradition, I want to begin with a warm-up question. And this was said a couple of years ago, and it really stuck with me. And someone said, the purpose of education is to reproduce the inequalities we have in society. So I want you to take a moment to think about that. The purpose of, essentially what this is saying is the purpose of education, the purpose of schooling, the purpose of being and learning is to reproduce the inequalities we have in society. Inequalities, be they income, be they racial inequalities, all kinds of inequalities. Okay. And so when you think about this question, often people will say to me that no, education is about learning. Okay? Education is about learning, and it's about knowledge. They'll use the word knowledge. Okay? And the question I always ask myself is, what knowledge is being learnt? Okay? And often people will say to me, important knowledge. Important knowledge, okay? Knowledge that is important, and I ask them to do what? And they will say, to get a job. Or important to succeed in life, broadly speaking. And so I ask them, what jobs are connected to knowledge, right? And then they'll start listing very high-end jobs. Okay, they'll be saying that if you get a bachelor's degree in computer science, you'll be able to work for Microsoft, or you'll be able to work for these different places. And so there's this idea that what we know determines our economic status, right? Now, this isn't always true. This isn't always true, right? But when we begin to unpack this, what this person is saying is that essentially education is designed to stratify society. That, for example, working class children who live on a farm, for example, will go to schools that essentially their parents went to and their parents went to, right? And those schools will teach them to be farm workers. So they'll go to school and learn the knowledge that will get them the job to be a farm worker. And then when they graduate, they will become farm workers and their children will become farm workers. In the same way, the farm owner will send his child to a school that will teach him how to be a farm owner. And he or she will end up getting a job, either as a farm owner or an owner of farms, right? So there's this idea that education really plays a role in behaviors. Remember, we talk about socialization. I'm using the British spelling of behaviors here. Education plays a role in socialization, which is very closely linked to success. Often, employers will tell me that the main thing that they look for in an interview is not what the person knows, but how the person interacts with them. And how a person interacts with them comes from the way they've been socialized. All right. So I want you to think about this, and I hope you're disagreeing with me wherever you are. I hope you're having thoughts in your mind that are saying to you that Mr. Chalklin is speaking a lie here, right? And I hope you're really beginning to think about this. I hope you'll also talk about this with some of your friends and colleagues. All right, so what does Golnick and Chin say about all of this? Class is a system that differentially structures group access to economic, political, cultural, and social resources. Okay? Remember that knowledge is a resource. Knowledge is a resource. What we know is a resource, okay? Now, there are two views of class. One is that class is a perfectly acceptable way of structuring society. So someone says to me the other day, yes, but we need people to work at McDonald's, right? This is someone who's showing the accepting view of class structure. The other view is a resisting view. And what that view says is that no, education should be a place that opens doors for people to make their own choices. And one of those choices can be working at McDonald's. The other choice can be owning the McDonald's. Right? So this is a resisting view. Okay? Now, class identity is what this term basically means. I'm going to break this down for you. Class identity. I want to go back to this idea of socialization. Back to this idea of enculturation. And back to this idea of assimilation. All right. And how I'm going to link these in is to say that not only, for example, am I a person of a certain ethnicity, a person of a specific race, but I also exist in a class structure. I earn certain amounts of money. I have certain amount of resources, right? And in my class structure, they've socialized me to wear a tie, for example, when I'm presenting in a professional environment, all right? If I didn't, and the way that happened is slowly but surely, I'm looking at role models who present or are teachers, and they have a certain dress attire. They're enculturating me to say that if you want to be a teacher and you want to be a professional teacher, you need to look a certain way. You need to behave a certain way, right? And assimilation is when you're teaching an Aggie class to wear your Aggie ring, right? It's a symbol of the fact that I'm assimilated into this class and cultural structure. So I exhibit behaviors like formal language. I'm talking in formal language to you right now. It may not sound like formal language, but it really is. And that's because I'm part of this class identity. And all of us have it, right? And you will notice when you come into different environments that people behave different ways, right? And part of that is to do with class, part of that is to do with race. But right now we're starting to unpack the role of class in those interactions. All right. So social economic status, SES. This is a term that you need to think about. Social economic status. Let's break it down, right? So we have social, economic, and status. All right. Social, think about the word social, right? People, social. Economic, think about resources, mainly money, but other kinds of resources, all right? And status, where you are, what sort of things you are, okay? So we're thinking about things like income, wealth, occupation, education. Now, what is the difference between wealth and income? Wealth is accumulated. Wealth are things that people inherit. Wealth is something more than just money. It's resources, it's connections, it's cultural capital, something known as cultural capital. I'll give you a good example about this in a moment. For example, coming into Texas A&M and not putting an orange carpet in my office. I really like burnt orange, but I don't think it should go in my office, right? Why? Because someone has given me a resource to say that if you want to be at Texas A&M and you want Aggies to enjoy coming into your office or having students come into your office hours, you shouldn't have a burnt orange carpet. Okay. So these small deposits that people make into as they're assimilating me, build up and become a source of wealth. They become a source of wealth for me, right? Not only that, but also assets and other physical things. But in terms of culture, what they're doing is they're helping me navigate my environment and be successful. Now, different classes have different rules, informal rules, that they use to be successful in their environment. On to this. I want to challenge Golnick and Chin and say that education is a large determinant of your class. I think, and I'm going to describe the rest of this presentation refuting this statement. And I'm sure in the beginning of this presentation, we began to talk about some of the limitations of this. Okay. Now, class and social structures are not unique to any one society. Historically, we've had them. For example, let's begin here. In Roman times, all right, you'll just perhaps see my hand on the screen here. We have different social structures. I'm going to read them out to you. You have the low classes and slaves here at the bottom. You have the notables and rich citizens over here. And finally, you have the senators, knights, and their wives. Okay? Now, that's Roman times. We also have a complex class and caste system in India. All right? And at the bottom we have the pariahs, or the untouchables. We then have the Sudras, the Vaisyas, the Kshatriyas, and the Brahmins. So this is a social structure that's been created in India, right? The US is no different. This is a good example of the US, where you talk about part-time and unemployed people, clerical service and blue collars, and this is their income. Remember, it's not only about income. It's also about cultural capital and the like. Professional and support services and professionals, as well as CEOs and politicians. So this is a good example of how a class structure begins to emerge in. Here we call them the underclass or the lower class, the working class, the middle class, the upper class, and the elite. All right, so these are the terms that we use to describe these different groups. Okay, what are the implications for teaching? Right, so I've spoken to you about this class structure that exists, right? Why should we care, all right? Here's some key things. Firstly, there's no such thing as a poor student, only a low-income parent, all right? When people talk to me about poor students, I ask them, it doesn't make sense. There's no such thing, right? There's only a low-income parent, all right? Secondly, students often don't know that they are low income until teachers begin to treat them that way. Teachers have a powerful, powerful way of shaping the way students feel about themselves and the way they think about their world. Often, because they're in peers of low socioeconomic status, they often don't realize that they are in fact poor, right? Quote unquote poor, right? Teachers begin to treat them poorly, and that begins to plant the seed, all right? Secondly, some important things that you need to know. Washing hands is critical, especially if you're an elementary school teacher. Washing hands can save students up to 3 weeks of schooling a year, all right? Especially the little ones, all right? Washing hands is critical. They may not have access to water. Where I came from, some students had no access to water. Diseases are very easily caught. Washing hands is a very good way of dealing with that. Nutritious food is critical. Nutritious food enables brain development, concentration, and the like, all right? Homework expectations. Account for the student's home environment when distributing homework, all right? Finally, as I said earlier, expectations are key. Treat or teach every child as though they were yours. The problem is not the students learning, the problem is our teaching, all right? Often people will tell me about problem students, and I have to flip the conversation around in terms of problem teachers, okay? Students will learn. The job of the teacher is to figure out how to accommodate them, how to nurture them, and how to ensure that they learn. So, the takeaways from this presentation. Number one, class is a very important part of societal structure. Students will come into your classroom from multiple class areas. Each of those class areas have different rules, have different sources of capital, both income and wealth. You need to understand those informal and formal rules that govern those class systems in order to be effective. For example, how to gain respect from students. It differs according to class. Secondly, there's no such thing as a poor student, only a poor parent, a low-income parent. So teachers cannot put the expectations of these children that they are poor and cannot learn, all right? We need to treat each child as though they were our own child. We need to make sure that we teach the way they learn, all right? And finally, pulling all of this together, we need to adapt. We need to figure out where students are so that we can take them to where they can be. Thank you very much for this week, and I'll see you next week.